Yo, 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 what's going on? It's your boy, the Joe Burrow of being thorough, the CJ Stroud of pleasing a crowd, the Jared Goff of never logging off, the Brock Purdy of riding dirty, and the Tyler Shough of I just don't give a. What? What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
What's going on, guys? Scott Barrett here, School of Scott, solo pod. What are we going to do today? We're going to go through every quarterback in order of ADP, and I'm going to be giving you just one narrative stat factoid on every quarterback, just one for each quarterback. If I'm going to give you one that's negative, that doesn't necessarily mean I dislike that quarterback, but I'll be honest, I probably do. Probably for the most part, the more favorable this narrative stat, factoid, whatever, probably the more I like this player. And the reverse of that also being true. So the way I do my rankings, at least ever since Upside Wins Championships drops, which was like 2020, I think, when I first penned that article. What I do is like I take a look at every single player. I try and make a bull case argument, a bear case argument, just like the most pessimistic argument you can, and a base case, median projection, most likely outcome. And just keep in mind, the bull case, the upside for a player matters the most. It's like, let's say 55% weighting. And then the base case is like 30%. And the bear case is 15%. Not as important because, like, for the most part, just about every player has like the same, downside risk. It's like, they get hurt and score 0 points and you drop them, something like that. And so, yeah, today, we're going to do this on quarterbacks. I might do this again on tight ends, running backs, and wide receivers. I'm going to go through all 32 quarterbacks who are likely to be starting for their teams in week one. But I will say, for the most part, just, probably like the first 15 are really the only ones that matter, unless you're in a super flex league or unless you're playing best ball, which is like an entirely different game. But in a start sit league, the way it works is you have your big four, your big five quarterbacks who just have the highest ceilings, the highest median projections, the best consistency week to week. And they're really a tier above everyone else. And so that's why they go a lot earlier. And then you kind of have everyone else. And then, like I said, you get down to the 15 and like say QB 16, 17 doesn't really matter just because those players aren't always going to be drafted in your fantasy leagues. And so they're going to be, players you can pick up through free agency. And this is why partly a late round quarterback approach has been so successful, is you have that safety net of the waiver wire to fall back on. But it's not just the safety of that. You could be streaming quarterbacks. JJ Zacharyson, made his name in the industry talking about streaming quarterbacks. And historically, he'll cobble together like QB8, QB9 production. So that's your floor. Like, it's not even QB12, which is like the worst possible starter. It's like QB9 through streaming. And that's the floor. But you also have upside beyond that, because you can find league winners off waivers in the middle of the season or late in the season. Guys kind of come out of nowhere. Rookies get a starting job or whatever. So I would say if you wanted to turn this off after QB 15, you can. But I do think I have some good stats, narratives on those later round quarterbacks. And who knows, maybe one of them is my Exodia this year. That's what I'll tease for you. One of these quarterbacks is going to be my Exodia quarterback. I will not be telling you who it is. You can kind of surmise that on your own. And for those of you who don't know, is here's my track record on Exodia quarterbacks 2019, Lamar Jackson. I had MVP bets. I was telling everyone who would listen to bet him on MVP. I got absolutely trashed for that. 2021, Jalen Hurts. 2022 Justin Fields, 2023 Anthony Richardson, which looked good up until that injury and doesn't look as good anymore. Then last year, Jayden Daniels, my strategy was just draft, here's your entire quarterback strategy is don't leave your draft without Jayden Daniels, the end. And all those guys were drafted, QB 12 or later. And so, hopefully we have a new Jayden Daniels, a new Lamar Jackson, a new Jalen Hurts from this year's crop of quarterbacks. But anyway, without further ado, today's podcast, we're going to start off at the top. QB1 by ADP, just about everywhere. Josh Allen. And here's my narrative, my tidbit, my factoid, my stat is Josh Allen has finished first or second in fantasy points per game in each of the last 5 seasons. Over this span, he leads all quarterbacks by 2.3 fantasy points per game. What is this saying? Basically, it seems like this ADP is deserved. And so, this podcast is really going to be centered around start-sit leagues, which I think are more compelling, more interesting than best ball. But for some of these, I will give you a best ball take, and I'll go out of my way to, preface it by saying it is a best ball take, and that's the case with Josh Allen here. I think he's like super undervalued in best ball leagues. I think it's kind of crazy, honestly, because he has nearly unrivaled, can't win without upside. So like in a start sit league, I think you can devalue like highest end quarterbacks a little bit relative to best ball, but like in a tournament style league, like FFPC main event, Big Gorilla or Underdog, I think he's really underrated. I think he's probably going a little too late. Because in week 14, he scored the most fantasy points ever. And then in week 15, he scored the 38th most fantasy points by any quarterback in any game all time. And so like across those 2 weeks, 2 consecutive back-to-back weeks, he averaged 46.6 fantasy points per game. Joe Burrow averaged 22.7. Jalen Hurts averaged 26.7. And so like imagine if those weeks came in the championship and the week before the championship is like you were not cashing, you were not winning without having Josh Allen on your roster. And so just, again, unrivaled, had to have it upside, can't win without upside. So in these tournament style leagues, I think Josh Allen is really underrated, pretty strong value. Next quarterback, Lamar Jackson, my stat, factoid, whatever, is he led all quarterbacks in fantasy points per game last year, but this was actually the first time he was inside the top 3 since his historic 2019 season. And honestly, he probably wouldn't have been top 3 last year if not for an insane red zone touchdown rate. And what this means is like he's a pretty glaring regression candidate. So like touchdown rate is something like we'll always talk about as like it's a really good, you're going to regress to the mean stat. JJ Zacharyson talks a lot about this. I've talked a lot about this. And I've kind of went a little more niche with this where it's like specifically red zone touchdown rate. Lamar Jackson had 33 red zone touchdown passes on 67 red zone pass attempts. So his touchdown rate inside the red zone was 49%. We've never seen a quarterback in the fantasy points data era over 35%. And this is just really like a stat that just always regresses to the mean. The league average rate is 22.9%. Lamar's average is 24.6%. And again, he was at nearly 50% last year, which is crazy. And I've never seen anyone else at 35% or above. And so, me, I love Lamar Jackson, but QB2 ADP, this is just one narrative. I can make pro arguments, but this is a pretty good regression to the mean stat. Jayden Daniels, right now QB3 by ADP. My stat on him is he picked up a rib injury that knocked him out of that Carolina game in week 7. He had 50 rushing yards and only 2 pass attempts. It was, the first quarter. But, that injury knocked him out of that game. And it limited his mobility from there on. And then in week 11, he suffered a wound, an open wound to his throwing hand that had to get super glued closed. And so, let's just say week 7 through 11, exclude those due to injury, the rib injury that hampered his mobility, and then that hand injury. Excluding those games, Jayden Daniels averaged 26.9 fantasy points per game, which would have been most of any quarterback. He did this as a rookie. He has a better supporting cast this year. QB4, Jalen Hurts. He averaged 0.74 fantasy points per dropback last year. That's the second best of any quarterback in fantasy points data history. So basically hyper efficient on a per dropback basis. A counter argument to this is they ranked dead last in pass attempts last year. He had 16.1 fewer dropbacks per game than the Bengals, which is crazy. But if all these quarterbacks had the exact same number of dropbacks, Jalen Hurts would have averaged 27.5 fantasy points per game. Josh Allen, 26.7. Jayden Daniels, 23.0. Problem is, Philadelphia's defense actually probably isn't going to be as good as it was last year. So maybe that's a feather in his cap. He also did this insane hyper efficiency with AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert all healthy for only 4 games. QB5, Joe Burrow. And this one's interesting. This is really where it's is there a big 4? Is there a big 5? At a bare minimum, you have to put Joe Burrow in a tier unto himself above everyone coming after him. So it's either a tier of 4, a tier of 1, everyone else, or there's a big 5. This stat is going to make you think there's a big 5. So Joe Burrow, over his last 40 fully healthy games, so you're really just excluding games he left early due to an injury. But I'm also excluding those first 4 weeks in 2023 when he was coming back and was clearly not right. The coaching staff was like, yeah, we can't run our real offense because he is so hampered. But last 40 fully healthy games, he averages 23.5 fantasy points per game. That's more than Jalen Hurts. That's more than Lamar Jackson. That's only 0.5 less than Josh Allen. That's over their last 40 fully healthy games. QB6, Patrick Mahomes. He's finished outside of the top 10 quarterbacks in back-to-back seasons after ranking top 6 in 5 straight. What's causing this fall off? He led the league in first half passing yards per game last year, despite no Rashee Rice, no Hollywood Brown. Led the league in first half passing yards per game, was 29th in second half passing yards per game. What is that saying? Kind of suggesting that his defense is just too good. Maybe Mahomes could go berserk if he wanted to, but he doesn't really care about stat padding. He cares about winning, cares about, the playoffs a little bit more than regular season. So QB7, Baker Mayfield. This ties back into Lamar Jackson, sort of screaming regression candidate. He had a top 30 season all time by touchdown rate. Remember we said, that's a number that just about always regresses to the mean in the following season. By red zone touchdown rate, it was second only to Lamar Jackson. And there's no Liam Cohen. Doesn't seem like that's priced in. Before last year, he had never finished top 20, inside the top 20 by fantasy points per game. This year, he's QB7 by ADP. QB8, Kyler Murray. This is just sort of a narrative I've been running with for quite some time. Is that he's Gen Z Jay Cutler. He degaffs. I don't think he gives a hoot about the NFL, or at least I have questions regarding his gaffe. because we all know the memes about Call of Duty and his stats falling off of a cliff every year after the new Call of Duty drops. But there's more to that. Like his last contract extension included an independent study clause where Murray was required to study game material for a minimum of 4 hours per week, which is nothing. If you're like an athlete who's making millions upon millions of dollars. And then if he breached that contract, he would have had to forfeit a very significant percentage of his guaranteed money. This is like, I've never heard of this with any other player. And this was in his contract, and then it got leaked. And I guess Arizona brass was embarrassed and he removed this clause. But like the fact that it was in there in the first place, I think speaks a lot about Kyler Murray and his buy-in. And then there was this really interesting quote from Cowboys' new head coach, Brian Schottenheimer. This is back in March, courtesy of CoachSpeak Index. He was relaying the OC, Clayton Adams' experience coaching Murray. And he was like, well, the thing about Kyler is he never really wanted to run. He was really good at it, but he'd go into certain games and tell the coaches, yeah, I'm not really feeling running this week. Like I can't believe this is a real quote, but you could find it courtesy of CoachSpeak Index. And yeah, like I just like question how much he cares. But like obviously there's massive upside if he decides to run. We really saw that in 2020 where he averaged 9.2 rushing fantasy points per game. Since then, every single year he's between 5.1 and 5.4. Like, I think he could do it. It's just like a matter of will. To be a little optimistic, Johnny Venerable, who is a beat writer covering the Cardinals, he said Kyler Murray told us on our show a month ago, he said he wants to run more, will run more this year. Direct quote, courtesy of 32 beat writers. I don't know how much I buy that from a player who has gaff concerns, but hey, again, it's really just a matter of gaff, I think. And so like if he flips that switch, you could be in for a league winning season. I've said this before. I think Kyler Murray, especially in that 2020 season, was like the most impressive quarterback I've ever seen from a mobility standpoint. And I'm like Lamar Jackson's biggest fan, but Lamar Jackson was very like straight line speed, whereas like Kyler Murray would just like teleport like Nightcrawler constantly and buy himself so much, like a little jitterbug running around in the pocket, buy himself so much extra time, and then throw a big play or break off for an awesome run. Like, maybe not more impressive, but just like more rare and like unique. Never seen a quarterback teleport like Kyler. Like he looks like an elite kick returner from the 90s. QB9, Bo Nix. We're going to start off with making note that like Sean Payton is just like money for his quarterbacks. I've talked about this for a long time. We remember Taysom Hill, who was like not even a quarterback. He's like a tight end running back. He averaged 20.5 fantasy points per start. It was actually like better as a pass catcher than I think he would give him credit for. And then he had a wash Drew Brees, 39, 40, 41, couldn't throw farther than 15 yards. He averaged 19.8 fantasy points per start. Bo Nix last year as a rookie with bad receivers, 19.3, sixth most ever by a rookie quarterback. Russell Wilson, who stinks. Trevor Siemian, who stinks, 18 fantasy points per start. Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, both over 17 fantasy. So you have these like backup caliber quarterbacks putting up low end QB1 numbers with Sean Payton. But Bo Nix kind of looks like by far the best of this group. From week 5 on, he averaged 21.6 fantasy points per game. That's just 0.1 less than Jalen Hurts. That's 0.1 more than Jayden Daniels last year. And now keep in mind, he played through 3 back fractures over his last 6 games. Sneaky, impressive mobility. 3 back fractures for over his last 6 games. And he did really seem to get better as the season progressed by all of the advanced stats. Justin Fields, QB 10. My stats on him. So QB 10. Over the last 3 years, QB 5, QB 6, QB 9 by fantasy points per start. QB 2, QB 6, QB 4 by fantasy points per dropback. Now QB 11 by ADP. I'm not going to tell you the quarterback. I'll just read off the stats on him. 2022 led all quarterbacks in fantasy points per dropback. 2023 led all quarterbacks in fantasy points per opportunity. 2024 over his last 8 games, minus 2 really bad weather games. And I promise I'm not being too heavy-handed here. Week 13, there was a blizzard. Week 15, there was really heavy rain. And I wouldn't mention it unless the other quarterbacks in those games were like awful, averaging like 2.2 yards per pass attempt. So last 8 games would be last 10, but I'm excluding 2 bad weather games. Last 8 games averages 23.8 fantasy points per game. Would have been 1.0 more than Josh Allen. We're talking about Brock Purdy. And he did this with Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Trent Williams, and Deebo Samuel, all messed up or missing time. Dude is just underrated. Like you just don't. He was the heavy MVP favorite, minus money easy heading into week 16 in 2023. Is he elite? No, probably not. Is Kyle Shanahan elite? Yeah, probably. QB 12, Caleb Williams. He had the worst quarterback season in fantasy points data history in terms of accuracy as measured by catchable throw rate, the worst season by sack avoidance as measured by pressure to sack ratio. It was the worst deep passing season in fantasy points data history. And then even with a clean pot, like Chicago Bears fans just like keep attacking me. You know, the offensive line was bad, blah, blah, blah. With a clean pocket, no pressure, and targeting an open receiver, Caleb Williams was still bottom 3 of 36 qualifying quarterbacks in CPOE. Completion percentage over expectation, catchable throw rate, yards per attempt, adjusted net yards per attempt. Listen, this is just one narrative for each guy, like the way it works as I'm doing my research, as I'm cobbling together my rankings, it's like I have a stat and then sometimes I'll have a counter or an argument and then I'll have a counter argument to that. And then I'll have a counter argument to that. And I'll just, argue against myself for like an hour and I'll spend all day on my rankings and I'll, blink and 9 hours have passed. And, I'm still talking about one guy and I'm going down random wormholes. Yeah. Ben Johnson, elite supporting cast, but we're just going with one narrative for each quarterback. QB 13, Dak Prescott. In 2019, he was the QB 3 by fantasy points per game. In 2020, he was the QB 1 by fantasy points per game. In 2021, he was the QB 8 by fantasy points per game. 2022, QB 6 by fantasy points per game. With that one, there's an asterisk, mild injury adjustments. I'm just excluding the game he got hurt and then his first game back after missing 5 games. But if I do that, QB 6, 2023 QB 4 by fantasy points per game. And so again, right now, QB 13 by ADP, and it goes QB 3, QB 1, QB 8, QB 6, QB 4. And then he sucked last year, which we all know, but dude was the MVP runner up just 2 years ago. QB 14, Drake Maye. This one's a little more convoluted. So Drake Maye averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game across his 9 full games last year. That would have been good for QB 11. That does also, by the way, exclude a Jets game. He left early. He had 11.5 fantasy points in 1 quarter. So he was on pace for like 45 fantasy points, but QB 11 across his 9 full games. He did this despite like maybe the worst supporting cast ever. The offensive line was awful. It was a second percentile O-line by pressure rate over expectation. Scott DiBenedetto, 10-year NFL scout who works with us, has them going from the stone worst offensive line in football, 32nd to 23rd this year. But yeah, one of the worst offensive lines ever. The receivers were also trash, 10th percentile team ass. In spite of that, Drake Maye balled out, 75th percentile accurate throw rate. But his fantasy production was probably most hamstrung by his coaches, which like gets lumped into this supporting cast argument. And I think this is understandable because, you know, they didn't want their young rookie phenom to get hurt and then like immediately lose all their jobs, which of course happened anyway, but they didn't want him really running. And so he was amazing at it. He led all quarterbacks in yards per carry. He ranked second in scramble rate. He ranked second in scramble yards per game, but he averages 0.1 fantasy points per game on design runs. You know, the Jayden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts of the world were all over 3.5. Jalen Hurts was at 7.4, you know, and Maye was at 0.1. And again, 18.7 fantasy points per game. In spite of all of this, per sources, the new coaching staff will use him on design runs more often. QB 15, Jared Goff. Last 3 seasons, he averages 21.6 fantasy points per game at home. That would have been more than what Jayden Daniels averaged last year. It's like easy top 6 production. But on the road, 14.8 fantasy points per game. That's like Drew Lock territory. So basically what this is saying is like, do you really want to draft Jared Goff? Or do you want to just play him in DFS in home games? Also, like just an aside, like I worry about Ben Johnson not being there. Just like no Liam Cohen for Baker Mayfield. Yeah, I don't think you could really have it both ways where T-Law is a breakout and, you know, Caleb Williams is a breakout, but there's no doc to Jared Goff or Baker Mayfield. QB 16, Justin Herbert. And I think what really like comes down with him is rushing upside. This is something I've talked about every year since he came into the league, and it's never materialized, like never even close to materialized. But I talk about this every year. And it's because Greg Roman was, you know, the mobile quarterback whisperer. Colin Kaepernick, Lamar Jackson, even Alex Smith was a very productive runner. And he's a Josh Allen clone. Like, or at least he was, because according to Harbaugh, he put on 20 pounds of muscle mass this offseason. So now he's just like a bigger, stronger, just as fast Josh Allen. And so, yeah, again, I talked about this last year. I was like, you know, Justin Herbert, if he wanted to, could break leagues. I just don't know that he wants to. Does he want to? Because like he's really good at running the ball. He's a freak athlete, but we just haven't really seen the volume there. And so I talked about this last year, but I stopped talking about it when we found out he was entering the season with a plantar fascia injury. And then he also picked up an ankle sprain later in the year. So, you know, maybe there were plans for him to run and like it was derailed by injury. But I saw this quote, shout out Coach Speak Index. Chargers offensive coordinator Greg Roman on Justin Herbert's legs, June 6th. This is what Greg Roman said. I think we'll see Justin use his legs a bit more this year. He can really affect the game with his legs. It creates so much stress on the defense when they have to defend that. That was off the table most of last year because of the injuries. We'll definitely have some QB-driven run game stuff available. How much of it we do will be dependent on what we need to win the game. That has me really bullish. Like this is just, you know, the Konami code, right? Such a cheat code in fantasy football because 25 passing yards equals 10 rushing yards. 2 rushing touchdowns equals 3 passing touchdowns. So it's just a cheat code. Could Justin Herbert break leagues this year? I think he could. Now we have our intermission. So we just went through 16 quarterbacks. We got 16 more to go through. I think it's optional. My Exodia quarterback might be in here, guys. Might not be. But for the most part, these guys are on waivers. Probably not going to get drafted. So in like a typical 1 QB 12 team league, little intermission here. You guys just went through 16 quarterbacks. We got 16 more to go. I just want to say thank you, guys. Like seriously, I was it was my little sister's wedding, spending some time with my uncle, and he was like, "Oh, you have a podcast? Yeah, let me check it out." So I pull it up for him on Apple. I see he has all 5-star reviews. Like I think that's crazy. We were going through the reviews together. They were very, very nice and complimentary. And that just like means a lot. Like I've been in this fantasy game a really long time, and I just refuse to have a podcast. And part of that was just like, I just didn't think I was good on audio or video. I really like how I sound in my written content. I feel like I like gain 10 IQ points, when I'm on the page, and I lose 10 IQ points when I'm behind the mic. And so this, I was like insecure and nervous, and I lacked confidence and all this stuff. And this is really great to see. And so I really appreciate the support. I appreciate the kind words, and I feel like I'm getting better every month I do this. And so I'm really glad you guys like it. And I think it's just going to keep getting better from here, in a large part due to Theo, who just makes it so easy for me. So thank you guys for supporting the podcast, for leaving all those reviews. I think I'm going to stick around and keep doing this, and just appreciate everyone who listens. It really means a lot. And I will say, we are happy to answer any questions you guys have. We want to do some mailbag episodes. So email us at schoolofscott69@gmail.com, schoolofscott69@gmail.com. Right now we have like 0 emails. I don't know how many times we plugged it. So like, if you ask a question, your odds of us getting to it and answering you on a podcast are like near 100%. So, just drop whatever you want to say. We'll take a look at it and get to it probably on a podcast. So schoolofscott69@gmail. But back to quarterbacks. Next up, we have JJ McCarthy, Brett's boy. Here's my stat or narrative on him. Actually, it's not really on him. It's on the Vikings. Vikings led the league in passing yards in 2023. They did that with 4 starts from Joshua Dobbs, 3 starts from Nick Mullins, 2 starts from Jaron Hall, and they led the league in passing yards. All those scrubs combined to be fantasy football's QB8. And then 2024, last year, Sam Darnold was the QB9 by fantasy points per game, despite some like really bad injuries to his offensive line. He ranked top 5 in passing yards, top 5 in passing touchdowns. JJ McCarthy is better than all those guys. Kevin O'Connell's elite. Could he have a 2022 Brock Purdy-like season? I'd say the odds are very good. QB18, Jordan Love. Let's not forget this was John Hanson's Exodia quarterback last year. And so Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love have both kind of referred to last year as a lost year for him. Matt LaFleur was on Pat McAfee's show saying, you just can't look at last year. It's just like fake. It's all fake news. And Jordan Love has kind of said the same thing. Why? He sprained his MCL in week 1. It was a pretty bad injury. Then he had a groin injury, which was even worse. And then all the way at the end of the year, picked up an elbow injury on top of it. And so other than that, he averages 21.9 fantasy points per game over his last 12 fully healthy games. That just excludes any game he left early and anything coming after that groin injury. So like even keeping in the MCL, 21.9 over his last 12. That would have ranked top 5 last year. That would have been ahead of Jayden Daniels and ahead of Jalen Hurts. He was honestly good last year. He's been top 7 in fantasy points per drop back in each of the last 2 years. What happened? Pass rate over expectation plummeted. Josh Jacobs kind of stole all the touchdowns away from him. But But yeah, I don't think we see Green Bay being the least pass heavy offense in football this year. I think that was an aberration due to this injury. And I see a big bounce back. I think the supporting cast is probably even better now. QB 19, Trevor Lawrence. As we're getting deeper in the weeds, I'm not going to be as verbose. We can keep these kind of short. And you already know probably where I'm going with this. QB 19, Trevor Lawrence. He's just never been good. He's never been good. People think he's really good. He's never been good. He's paid like he's elite. He's never been good. He's never finished top 10 in fantasy points per game. But maybe Liam Cohen's the GOAT. Maybe. Mayfield never finished top 15 in fantasy points per game. He was fourth best last year. So is Liam Cohen the GOAT? I think a lot of it comes down to that. Really good supporting cast. Well, at least his pass catchers are nice. His offensive line still fringe bottom 12, which I think is really Trevor's biggest issue historically. But QB 20, CJ Stroud. He led the league as a rookie in passing yards per game. So the third most by a rookie quarterback ever. And then what happened? He sucked ass last year. He was so bad. 11.9 fantasy points per game over his last 11. That's like worse than Deshaun Watson. Texans have the worst offensive line in football this year per Scott DiBenedetto. As an aside, he's also like an even bigger dome merchant than Jared Goff. What I mean by that is, the TLDR is just like, don't draft him. Just if you're going to play him in DFS in dome games. QB 21, Michael Penix. I'm stealing this one from Jared Smala. I think this is the first of two I'm stealing from him. That's that Michael Penix Jr.'s 87.6 PFF pass grade was the best mark by a rookie since Robert Griffin III. I think it's an interesting stat. I don't think it's super meaningful. Just the dude had a 3-to-3 touchdown to interception ratio. And I don't really put a ton of stock in PFF grades. Fantasy Points data will never do grades. But interesting. Basically says that the tape was really good within that limited sample. And despite Darnell Mooney missing some games. QB 22, Tua Tagovailoa. He led the league in passing yards 2 years ago, while Miami's backfield also led in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. I think that's interesting. You injury adjust. He's kind of like a low end QB1 at worst every year. QB 23, Bryce Young. When he took back over the job from week 8 on, Bryce Young averaged 18.8 fantasy points per game. It's like QB 10 range. He ranks 6th in PFF grade. Supporting cast is a lot better now. We'll say that the fantasy points feels fluky to me. He had 5 rushing touchdowns over his last 6. Maybe that's just like now a core part of his game, but feels a little fluky to me. QB 24, Matthew Stafford. He averages a pathetic 14.8 fantasy points per game since winning the Super Bowl. That ranks 36th, immediately behind Mason Rudolph. QB 25, Geno Smith. If you listen to my rant from a previous episode, you'll know I'm not a Geno Smith truther. Many people are, but this isn't about Geno. This is about Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly led the league in situation adjusted pace of play in 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016. And then he was out of the league. You may not remember, but the 2013 Nick Foles season was the stuff of legend. One of the best seasons by a quarterback ever by adjusted net yards per attempt and a number of other efficiency metrics. And then you have the benefit of extreme, insane pace of play where, volume is really good. Dropbacks are really good. Like that's a core part of what makes Joe Burrow so successful for fantasy. But Chip Kelly kind of like changed his offense around when he went to college. So maybe this isn't going to be the case this year. We know Pete Carroll isn't super fast-paced, pass-heavy, although he was more so with Geno than Russ, which I'll always find super interesting. But yeah, That's QB 25, Geno Smith. Now, QB 26, Cam Ward. This is another play caller stat. It's just me asking the question. Is Brian Callahan a quarterback guru? In 2017, Matthew Stafford had 7.01 adjusted net yards per attempt. That was his best season ever with Detroit, the second best season of his career, which is like kind of crazy for a guy who played with Sean McVay all these years. We know Joe Burrow's goated. This is really crazy. In 2023, from week 13 on, so the final 6 weeks of the season, Jake freaking Browning was the overall QB1. Week 13 on, 2023, Jake Browning, the number one quarterback in fantasy football. Last 6 weeks of the season. Crazy. And then maybe Will Levis is just like the worst quarterback ever, which like I think is right. QB 27, Sam Darnold. Last year, Darnold finished QB 9 by fantasy points per game as top 5 passing yards, passing touchdowns. Was it all Kevin O'Connell? Maybe Clint Kubiak special. Saints scored 47 and 44 points weeks 1, week 2 before number of injuries derailed the season. I mean, you look at their depth chart, it's like every single person hurt, out for extended period of time. Will he see ghosts behind Seattle's awful offensive line? We know he has that issue. Saw it in the playoffs, saw it all throughout his time with the Jets, seeing ghosts. Scott DiBenedetto says they have a bottom 3 offensive line. QB 28, Aaron Rodgers. Here's what's happened to Aaron Rodgers since 2019. He won MVP, and then he won MVP, and then he broke his thumb to his throwing hand and was hurt for over half the year. And then the following year, he threw one pass attempt and got hurt, didn't play again. And then last year, he sucked, but he had a bottom 3 offensive line. He had multiple injuries. He was coming off of that Achilles. He had a low ankle sprain. He had a knee injury. He had a hamstring. He had the MCL. Coach was fired halfway through the season. And in spite of all that, he still averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game, which is more than Trevor Lawrence. But yeah, not a player I'm drafting. Maybe make some bets on the Steelers. Arthur Smith, he turned Ryan for a brief period of time. Ryan Tannehill was the most efficient quarterback in football. It was like him and Mahomes and no one else. But yeah, it would not be a fantasy take. It would be more, Steelers bets. QB 29, Daniel Jones. I'll be honest, like I'm tea leaf reading pressers and quotes and coach speak index tweets. And I think it's over for Anthony Richardson. Like, don't forget my sources that I was talking about on this podcast very early into the year, before any of this news came out, that Anthony Richardson was degaffing. He was refusing to make time after practice or on weekends with his receivers. They begged him. He refused. And then he pulled himself out of that game, got benched. And Thanksgiving, Peyton Manning flew out to Indianapolis. This is a rumor. I didn't hear that. Someone tweeted about it. Flew out to Indianapolis. Anthony Richardson, refused to meet with him or didn't meet with him. And yeah, just vibes are just so pro Daniel Jones. Anthony Richardson also hurt, not playing. But so yeah, I think it's Daniel Jones. I kind of feel good about it. And so the narratives on this are Shane Steichen. Is he one of those really special QB whispering offensive gurus? Justin Herbert set NFL rookie records in passing touchdowns and passing yards per game with him. Jalen Hurts averaged 25.2 fantasy points per game in 2022 with him. He hasn't been over 21 since. He had 25.2. Anthony Richardson was like always top 3 in fantasy points per dropback, despite being awful. And like, I think Indianapolis has a really nice supporting cast. They have 4 great wide receivers, a really special rookie tight end who's a really strong blocker as well, kind of opens things up for this offense a bit more. Daniel Jones has 4 career games with over 90 rushing yards. That's tied with Michael Vick and Cam Newton. It's twice as much as Jalen Hurts. He had 32.5 rushing yards per game over his last 6 last year, despite coming off of an ACL. Shane Steichen was the guy who invented or at least popularized the tush push. Is he extreme discount Justin Fields? QB 30, Jaxson Dart. We hyped up Drake Maye as a runner, right? Well, Drake Maye averaged 48.5 rushing yards per game in his final collegiate season. Jaxson Dart averaged 49.1 over his last 3. So more than Maye. Does he start week 1? Almost certainly no. Does he start halfway through the season and not give up that job? Probably. So, this is more of a DFS take to me, is like, don't sleep on Dart's mobility. QB 31, Joe Flacco. Per sources, the team wants Kenny Pickett to win this job. I just kind of don't see him beating out Flacco. QB 31, Joe Flacco. In 6 starts for the Browns in 2023, was like the best quarterback in fantasy. He averaged 22 fantasy points per game. He averaged 323.2 passing yards per game. And it wasn't just like what he did. It's what he did for this supporting cast. Mari Cooper averaged 121.3 passing yards per game, 23.1 fantasy points per game. David Njoku, 78 yards per game, 18.4 fantasy points per game. Basically both were, one was like the overall wide receiver 1 in fantasy. The other one was a top 5 wide receiver, even though he was a tight end. Has that rapport with David Njoku. I like this supporting cast, and I like that the defense stinks. Vegas thinks this is going to be the worst offense in football. I'm bullish, man. I'm bullish. I Trey and I both play some 200-1 odd bets that Flacco leads the league in passing yards. Not the smartest bet in the world, but shouldn't be 200-1. QB 32, Tyler Shough, once again, stealing a stat from Jared Smalla. All 6 of Kellen Moore's NFL offenses have top 65 plays per game. For perspective, only 4 teams top 65 plays per game last year. So the offensive environment may be good even if he's not. Derek Carr retired. Other options are Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener. And then last, it's really more of a dynasty take. I think Kirk Cousins gets traded. I think they just can't trade him now. They couldn't trade him during the draft because he was still rehabbing the shoulder and ankle. Is there a team for him? I don't know. I mean, does every team really feel good about the quarterback they have? Tyler Shough? Really? Or I don't know. Maybe they're tanking. But Kirk Cousins, Dynasty Superflex. I would send a rookie round 3, see if you can get him. But that's about it. This is just, one stat, tidbit, takeaway, narrative, factoid for every quarterback. I'm working on my rankings, my draft guide, hopefully first week of August. And this is just, I have this, spent a lot of time on my rankings going, here's a pro argument, here's a con argument, here's a counter to that argument. And so you just got a little taste, a small sample of that in today's podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back with Theo recording very soon. Again, appreciate all those 5-star reviews. If you guys wanted to, if you haven't done that, wanted to help me out, I would appreciate it. If you want to tell your friends about us, that'd be cool. If you want to send us an email, ask a question, tell a story, ask Theo what his favorite color is. That's fine. schoolofscott69@gmail.com. And I'll let you guys guess who my Exodia quarterback is this year, who some of my favorites are. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait until August. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. Peace.